Welcome to this webinar on leveraging data to drive business results. This webinar is hosted by Antwerp Management School and we will take a strategic perspective. My name is Bas van Gils and I'm a professor here at Antwerp Management School. I'm, as Gael mentioned, very active in two areas. One is the field of digital transformation in general and enterprise architecture in specific. And the other is the field of data, and that's the area that I will be talking about today. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. We are here in Antwerp, and if we talk about data-driven business, or information-driven business, or whatever buzzword you can come up with in that area, what better place to start that journey than in Antwerp? Because this story is not really new. It's been around for not only decades, as most people seem to think, it's been around for centuries, really. I think we should start in 1555 here at the Museum of Plantes and Moretus. If you haven't been there yet, that's the first tip of today. You definitely should go there, because there you can see the origins of the data-driven journey, I would say. Plantin was a Frenchman. He came to Antwerp in 1550, and he started the print shop in 1555. This is in the middle of the 80-year war, and one of the really cool things that he did back in those days is to play both sides of the war. So he was doing business both with the Spanish authorities and, let's say, with the Dutch. So he really opened up the market, which is a smart thing to do, I would say. He also competed well because he selected the best authors of his time. Quality, also in today's data products and data-driven businesses, quality is, of course, an issue. You see that also in the high quality of print, and I will have an example about that as well. The better the paper, the better the quality of the font. So one of those authors that worked with Plantin was Abraham Ortelius. Ortelius is the person who made the first atlas of the world, right here in Antwerp. And you can actually go and see that in the museum. So what is special about that from the perspective of data, at least? Here we already saw in the middle of the 16th century a good example of mass customization. So you didn't buy a standard atlas as we would do now in the bookstore. No, you could select, let's say, 3 countries, and you could decide whether you wanted to have it in black or white or color, which would be more expensive, of course. And maybe you wanted text to accompany it in Dutch or in French or in Latin, whatever language you could choose. So mass customization as part of that strategy of disseminating data and information to the world was already invented here in the 16th century. And then there's, of course, the whole realm of innovation, something that's quite popular in today's management literature also. And Simon Stevin, another author that worked with Plantin, he more or less invented the decimal point. So if you have the number pi, which we know to be 3.1415, we didn't originally write it as 3.1415. And we said 3 is the 0th decimal, 1 is the 1st decimal, 4 is the 2nd decimal, and so forth and so on. But that quickly becomes a nightmare in print, so we had to have some kind of innovation or invention to really change that a little bit also. And so different things that were already invented right here in Antwerp in the 16th century to start the data-driven journey. So what better place to continue that journey than here with you right now? So let's fast forward more or less 500 years to the now. If we look at management literature and what's going on in the market, then data-driven is becoming one of the big buzzwords. It shows up pretty much everywhere. Companies want to become data-driven, whatever that means. Authors write about it, but unfortunately the whole thing is rather poorly defined, even in academic literature. I'll use 3 examples to illustrate that point. First, I worked with a pension fund provider. This is 2, maybe 3 years ago. They called us up and they said, we want to become a data-driven pension fund provider, which is an interesting idea. So my question was, what do you mean? What does that mean to you as a pension fund provider to become more data-driven? And the answer was rather shocking. They said, we don't know. That's what we're going to work with you on, and that's why we hire you and pay you the big bucks. So you want to become something, but you don't really know what it is. It's rather interesting. Another project that we completed not so long ago is a drinking water company. So we take surface water and groundwater and we transform that into drinking water. Old school business, people have been cleaning and distributing drinking water for centuries. And the first thing that they told me when I came into the management meeting was, Bas, listen, we're not an IT company. So if you start doing all these fancy IT projects, we're not really interested. A little bit later in time, when we were working for a couple of months, the management team discovered that, wait a minute, we're losing water left, right, and center. We're not exactly sure where all this water goes, so maybe we can use data to find out where all the leaks are. And in the middle of summer, where we're literally asking people to shower a little bit less and don't fill the swimming pool in the middle of the day, if you are able to detect those leaks early on and fix them, might be a really good idea. So that's their version of becoming more data-driven. And right now I'm working with a governmental organization, and citizens have the right to know on what basis the government make decisions about them. And in many cases it takes us really, really, really long to figure out what the data was or the information was on which the decision was based. So can we speed that up? Can we make government a little bit more transparent and thus contribute to a better society? Again, data-driven in another context. So the point of this story is that no matter what business you're in, data is going to hit you. And let's put that in perspective of a little model that I borrowed from my colleague, Professor Bas van Gils from the University of Antwerp. The things that I've been talking about so far are in the practical domain. These are real-world problems for real-world organizations. I'm quite sure that the people who see this will recognize and have all kinds of ideas like this is what we're struggling with. And what we always hope is that in the scientific domain we can study what's going on in the real world, we develop these theories, then we teach our students these theories and hopefully they will improve the world. Sometimes that works, but sometimes as soon as a student puts the signature on the diploma, half of what they have learned will be forgotten again, so that's rather unfortunate. Luckily, in between those domains, there's also the heuristics domain. This is the realm of the practical theories and the industry frameworks. So rather than remembering each and every detail of all those scientific theories, what students tend to remember is all those practical theories that will help them solve the real world problems. And of course, the model works best if all of these three domains are interlinked and combined. So what I'm going to do today, I already discussed 3 real organizations with real challenges. I will come back to that in a moment. I'm going to be very brief and say something about what is data. Because if we talk about becoming more data-driven, then we will have to define that term. We have to be really precise in what we mean by the term data. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of an industry framework called the DAMA-DMBOK, or DMBOK as people tend to call it, to give you an idea of what such a heuristics framework really looks like. So that's the outline for today. I'll start with, this is the most abstract one. I'm going to use the semiotic model developed by Ogden and Richards in the 1920s. I changed some of the words, as you can see here. So people look at the world, or part of the world, we call that a domain. And when we look at the world, something is going to happen in the brain. Hopefully it has something to do with what I'm actually observing. Yeah, I could of course be thinking, well, it's about time for lunch, but that doesn't really relate to what I'm seeing right now. Point of that story is also that as long as it's in my brain and I don't make it explicit, as long as I don't symbolize it, it stays in my brain and you have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah, so that's rather unfortunate. So what we can do is symbolize what is going on in our brain, hopefully in such a way that it can stand for what is going on in that domain. And I'm going to use that line of thinking to define data as follows. Data symbolizes our understanding of a domain such that it can stand for that domain. There's one point that I would like to make about this, that data is not objective, as a lot of people tend to think. It's subjective. It captures my understanding of what's going on in the domain in such a way that hopefully it It can stand for what I'm thinking is going on in that domain. You, as the audience, might have a different perspective. And then we can compare our data to see if we can come to some sort of a shared understanding. And this introduces the notion of context, which is the next topic that I'm going to talk about. Let's say we're talking about people and their location. So about people, we're going to record the social security number, first name, last name, all those things. And for persons, we are interested in who is where at what point in time. And if we use the relational model, not a scientific theory, then that could look like this. We are talking about a person with social security number 007. I always like to give myself that number. The first name is Bas, last name Van Gils, and you can read the rest. And here it also says in the second relation that on 21st of March at 11:35, the person with social security number 007 is at Boogkeers 5 in Antwerp and in Belgium. And I think that is going to be very true. Now let's say we want to use that data for whatever purpose you can come up with. And it looks fairly precise, and it is pretty precise, I would say, but it might still not be very useful. If I want to navigate with my car to Antwerp Management School, then that is actually a very good way of describing it. However, if I want to move a drone over that exact location and do something with the drone in relation to the person that we're talking about, then the address in the shape of, the location in the shape of Boogkeers 5 in Antwerp in Belgium might not be the best way to represent that. Maybe we need longitude, latitude as we see here. Maybe we also need some kind of altitude, so maybe this is still not precise or enough or shaped in a form that is useful for a new purpose. So the context really determines whether data is actually usable, yes or not, yes or no. And if we know how we're going to use the data, then of course we're going to collect it in the correct format. But in many cases, we do not or do not yet know what that is going to look like. And this is where most of the companies that I work with are struggling. We have to figure out how and where are we going to use our data, because we want to know that in order to collect it in the correct form, and then we can start using it. In my last book, Data and Context, I developed a framework to reason about this. And I'm going to briefly introduce that framework to you and then illustrate it, of course, with some examples. The top layer of that framework starts with the mission, vision, and strategy of an organization. I'll say a little bit more about how I see those terms, because my experience is that people tend to interpret them a little bit differently. We see that we have many means to achieve the ends that are articulated by the mission, vision, and strategy. And to make those things happen, we need people, we need data, we need processes, we probably need money, information systems, and whatever you can come up with. Those are all means that we can use to achieve those ends. Makes sense. If we then look at those means, then it might be a good idea to take care of them. So that's why we have human resource management, data management, process management, finance management, IT management, the whole shebang. All those things you can probably give more examples yourself. This also helps us, if we zoom in at the data column at least, to define the terms data strategy and data management strategy. And I'll do that a little bit more precisely in a moment. But data strategy is about the choices for using data, and data management strategy is what we use to describe how to take care of data. And I'll illustrate that in the next few slides. So let's zoom in on the purple highlights here, the top layer of our framework, and let's define our terms. And we are, after all, at the management school here, and we can be really precise. So if you do a literature review of mission, vision, and strategy, then you will come across many different interpretations of those words. For me, the mission is what you ultimately want for the world. Your vision is about your place in the world, your place and role in the world, how you see yourself more or less. And the strategy is how you aim to get there, how to achieve your vision in light of the overall mission. And so that's how I tend to use those words. My claim is that every organization has a mission, vision, and strategy, whether they choose to document them or not. For many organizations, we can simply go on the website, download the annual report, and then we will see these nice sentences about mission, vision, and strategy. In other cases, we can only figure out what the mission, vision, and strategy is by looking over our shoulder and trying to figure out what have these guys been doing over the last 5, 10, 20 years. And then by analyzing that, we can see a pattern and emerge, and that could be their strategy, of course. So that's a different way of looking at it. For purposes of this presentation, I'll use a mostly real-world example. I modified it slightly just to make it fit the story better and also to anonymize the case. But we could go for the mission that we want to work towards a future where professionals in a certain field, in the field of X, have access to all the information that they need to do the job well. That's fine. What is our vision? What is our self-image? What role do we want to play in that overall mission? It could be that we want to become a hub or a platform to really achieve these things. And what then is our strategy? Well, it could be that we say, well, our strategy is to work with the open source community. We make it very simple to get started, and that's debate. But as soon as you really want to use the platform, then we use the hook to get you on board, and then you start paying, and that's how we make a buck. It could be that that is our strategy. Now, of course, we have to take this and look at the data and data management component, because that's what this talk is all about. So now we zoom in on the bottom 2 layers of the framework. And just as a reminder, we know that we have different means to achieve the ends that we've just defined. So we have to figure out what is the role of people in executing that strategy in light of the vision, in light of the overall mission. What's the role of data in light of the strategy, in light of the overall mission, etc. The same for processes, systems, reputations, and money. You need all these things probably to be successful. If we then look at those ends, then we really have to take care of them. So if we see those means, if we see them as a new end, then the management disciplines become a new means. Right? So we have people, they are important, they are our most important assets. People tend not to feel like an asset, but that's how we talk about them. Therefore, we do human resource management. And no one in their right mind will question whether it's a good idea to do human resource management. We have processes. Maybe it's a good idea to talk about them, to manage them actively, to make sure that they perform. They're the value creation engine of the organization. And that's why we have process management. And no one in their right mind will ask questions about why should we really do this. If we then look at data, then you expect the same line of reasoning, but that's not entirely true, because data is abstract. So if we say, well, data is important, and that's what all the consultants say, but data management as a means to take care of that data, why do we really have to do that? And I think that's a consequence of the fact that people see data as an abstract thing. If you zoom out and look at that whole picture, then you can see that there's a double means-end relationship that we have to worry about. Why do we do data management? Because we want to take care of our data, because we want to use that data to achieve our mission, vision, and strategy. It's a double means-end relationship. And in order to be successful, you have to see that whole big picture. I call that the vertical complexity. It goes from mission, vision, and strategy to data management. There's also a horizontal complexity. And data in and of itself is not very interesting. Data becomes interesting in the context of people working in processes with systems using and manipulating those data in order to achieve the mission, vision, and strategy. That's the horizontal complexity. And we have to understand vertical and horizontal in order to be successful. As said, we can now define the terms data strategy and data management strategy. And unfortunately, again, those terms in the literature are very poorly understood. In Harvard Business Review in 2017, there was a nice article about what's your data strategy. I think that's the most well-defined version of that, and we translated that into this framework to make it even more concrete, because we can now point quite specifically at the different pieces. So the data strategy is the set of strategic choices that we make about how to use data to create value. That's what it's about. Nothing more, nothing less. So in light of the running example, we could say, well, how are we going to use data to create value for this platform thing that we've been talking about? Well, we could collect data about our customers and internal processes that helps us to improve, and learning by doing and measuring. But we also know that data tends to be biased, so we're going to balance that with expert judgment. This is, of course, just a piece of the puzzle, but that's how a data strategy can start. So, okay, fine, if we understand that, then what is the data management strategy going to be? This is all about a set of strategic choices that says something about how are we going to take care of data such that we can make the data strategy real. How is that going to work? Well, if you look at the example, then we deal with people data. That's sensitive. We have to be really careful about it. And that's different in the European Union than in the United States, so we have to take that into account. Maybe you have to work with people who have a legal background. We also expect that there are different needs depending on the country or the local maturity in a specific company or a different branch within a country, for example. And therefore, if we analyze that a little bit further, we're going to work in different countries, maybe a federated approach supported by a central tool so that we have a single knowledge base about what data that we have, what the quality is, etc. Maybe that's going to work best. And then we more or less have the story complete. We know the mission, vision, strategy, we know how we are going to use data to create value, and we have made some choices about how to manage data as an asset to make the other two things happen. It sounds like the story is done, but it's not. Because this is still super abstract. If I would tell this to my team in a real organization, then their eyes would glaze over and say, okay, but what am I going to do now? Which data are you really talking? What do you mean with customer data or data about internal processes? So we need something else. It's almost as if we've designed the compass so that we have a heading of where we want to go, but we don't have the map yet. And this is where a discipline like architecture, or more specifically data architecture, comes in. And data architecture gives me an overview of what data I have, how it is structured in a fundamental sense. And then the compass says, the data strategy, data management strategy says, how am I going to use it and how am I going to manage it? So you really need both. And that is, of course, the bridge to the question, what other things do I need to make this happen? And that's where this beast comes in. And this is the core framework in the data management body of knowledge, or the core representation of how the data management body of knowledge by the DEMA organization is structured. And now we're really talking about data management, the two highlighted elements in our overall picture. And my claim is that we can use the DMBOK wheel or the DMBOK pizza, because it looks a little bit like slices of a pizza, comes in handy. Each of those slices is called a functional area. It's the things that we have to master in order to be successful with data. And it's 10 plus 1 equals 11 of them, and I will give you the 5 to 10 minute run over to give you an impression of what is in the box if you start working with the DMBOK. I'm going through them one by one, and that might suggest that there's an order to these things, that you have to do architecture first, and then modeling and design, and then go around the wheel. That's not the case. And it's just literally the functional areas, and the order in which you execute them, that's something you will have to tailor to your own local situation. So what is data architecture about? I already gave a little bit of a clue. It gives you a map. It gives you an understanding of the data needs of the organization and helps you to create blueprints to address those needs. It's closely related to the field of enterprise architecture or digital architecture, or whatever you want to call it these days. But in the context of the data management body of knowledge, we call it data architecture. And architects tend to like their models, boxes and arrows, and then when we design data structures, we also like to do this. I see more and more business analysts also talking to business stakeholders saying, wait a minute, you have this problem over here. Let's try to come up with some sort of diagram to capture what it is that you really need, because then we can use that to start designing our solutions as well. And the function area of data modeling and design is all about that. It's a collection of modeling techniques that you can use to achieve your task in the space of data. It's a very broad area with many different techniques, and you can also, of course, extend that if you really want to. Then there's data storage and operations. This is the, let's say, the IT part of data management. I hope you've come to understand that data is a business asset, therefore data management is also a business discipline, but this is the most IT-ish part, more or less, of the field of data management. This is the realm of the database administrator. Whether you are talking about databases on premises in your own organization, or whether you're talking about these things out there in the cloud, or maybe a hybrid situation, doesn't really matter. Someone still has to take care of those databases, and that's what this function area is all about. Of course, we also worry about security and privacy. Privacy is not listed, but if we have to put it into the framework, then it should probably come into this functional area. And this is a risk-driven approach, where we talk about what are the key risks related to our data assets, and what are the risk mitigation strategies to address them. And typically we talk about confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of our data assets. And these are, of course, important. If we cannot guarantee the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and we're going to use our data, then what are we really doing? The data might not be as suitable for use as we would really like it to be. So we have to pay attention to how to mitigate those risks. It should also, of course, not be an afterthought, but ideally we do security by design. But that's another can of worms that we should open another time, maybe in another Wednesday webinar. Let's talk about data integration and interoperability also. We have many systems in our organizations. Not only that, we have many systems that we have to interact with that are just outside the organization. And we no longer see only silos. Those former silos are connected. I only know of one system that is completely separate from the rest of the world, and that's the child porn archive of the police. And you really want to keep that separate of the rest of the world for obvious reasons. Pretty much all the other systems that I've seen in the last 20 years or so are connected in some shape or form. So we have to worry about how to do that, and that's what data integration and interoperability is all about. When we say the word data, then typically people mean structured data, meaning rows in columns, in tables, in relational databases. There are, of course, other forms of content as well. There's documents, there's images, there's video, there's all kinds of stuff these days. And you really want to manage that as well, and that's what document and content management is all about. This is all about electronic records and all those really fancy things. Archiving is a big part of document and content management. And we see a lot of movement in that area because people are increasingly realizing that 90% of the data that we use in organizations is no longer only in structured form. So we have to improve our skills in that area. I'll speed up a little bit. The next two are very important, but maybe not so interesting for this webinar. I at least want to mention them. Reference data is data that we make use of when we want to make sense of other data. So if I have data about a customer and I say this is an A customer or a B customer or a C customer, then those A, B, and C mean something. The reference data. A could be our temporary customers, B could be regular customers, and C are our super special, returning, high-value customers, whatever interpretation you can give it. That's reference data. Master data or master data management is all about organizing a single version of the truth, a golden copy of our key data assets. And I'm sure you've also experienced, if you call an organization who might have 4 or 5 different copies of your data, and they still think you live at the address when you were a kid, with your parents, for example. You change it, next week you call again, and then, no, you still live in that old address, don't you? That is because they have so many different copies of your data. Wouldn't it be more convenient to have a single golden copy of your data, and we change it once, and that's the copy that we're going to work with? And dealing with that is called master data management. Then we have data warehousing and BI. In my humble opinion, that should be two areas, but it's a little bit like a reference and master data. We chunk them together. So data warehousing is about the IT and the platform part of it. Business intelligence is about using data for reporting, for looking back, for analysis, for predictions. Please note that data science is not listed. There is a separate chapter in the MBOK about data science. For the time being, I would squeeze that under the business intelligence flag. So that's where we think about those topics. If you know absolutely nothing about your data, then how are you going to use it, let alone manage it? So if I put a bunch of data here on the table, I take it out of the box and put it on the table, and I tell you absolutely nothing about it, how are you going to use it? At the bare minimum, you want to know the structure and meaning, but maybe you also want to know where it was created, how up to date it is, all those things. All this data about our data, that's what we call metadata. And that's really important. Without metadata, we can neither use nor manage our data assets. And data quality management is a dangerous subject. I always get very excited when I get to talk about it. I also wrote a dissertation about it, so I'm going to try to be brief. But what we saw in the opening of the webinar is that the quality of data is subjective and situational. And really depends on the context in which you are currently working, and it depends on who is assessing it. And something that works really well for me might not work really well for you, even though we're acting in the same context. The only way to resolve that is to talk about it. And we have to define a norm, and that norm becomes the bar against which we assess whether data is of sufficient quality. If it is, great. If it's not, then we probably have some work to do to make it more fit for purpose, and then we can get going again. And all these things, of course, do not happen on their own. It would be really nice to go in an organization just for once in my life and say, make it so. And then everything happens by magic. In the last 20 years, that never happened, and I don't expect it to happen in the next 20 years. So we have to somehow come up with a mechanism to get these things in motion, to do the right things, but also to do them in the right way. So that management discipline is what we tend to call data governance. It's the other part of data management. It's about making sure that it really happens. So this gives you a more or less complete overview of all the things that you have to think about when you want to manage data as an asset, to make sure that we have data of sufficient quality, to achieve our mission, vision, and strategy, of course also in light of the other horizontal complexity with processes, systems, people, money, and all those other things. Which starts to push me towards the conclusion. Interesting story, but how do we get started? That's a question that I get a lot. So I more or less morphed a model that I found in the literature to suit the purposes of this talk. We're going to talk about the horizontal axis, which is all about achieving sufficient grip on data, about managing data as an asset, and of course that links to our data management strategy. The vertical axis is all about getting value from our data. So this really links to the data strategy, or the top part of our model. And let's say that we're presently with our organization at the bottom left of this model. And of course, if you draw a 2x2, then everyone wants to move to the top right quadrant. How do you do that? Well, in theory, there are four different models that we distinguish. The first one is, first we have to build a foundation. And I'm sure you have colleagues who think this way. Say, well, we have to set up policies, we have to define strategies, we have to put tools in place, we have to do all these things, we have to train people, which is really important. And once we have everything in place, then maybe we can start using data and get some value out of it. And that's strategy number one. Extremely risk averse, but in some situations that might be necessary. The complete opposite is well, let's just try something. And we have those colleagues as well. Say, well, data sounds kind of cool. let's experiment with it a little bit, and we set up these things, and then later we worry about how to put that into a well-defined structure and get some grip on it. This could also work. It tends to have the risk that people run in all kinds of different directions, and then getting that grip back, getting that structure back becomes a little bit difficult. The more balanced approach, strategy number 3, says let's have a little bit of a foundation, and then we try something, and then we add a little bit to the foundation, and then we learn a little bit more. And this is more or less the learning organization strategy, where you introduce it one step at a time, and then you make sure that the amount of grip that you have is balanced with how you create value, or how much you use data to create value. And the fourth strategy, that's a theoretical one, is the Big Bang approach. That's where we say, well, we're now in the bottom left area of this model. We're going to close our eyes. We're going to hope that when we snap our fingers, the world is going to change, and by magic we jump to the top right quadrant. I haven't seen that in practice, whereas the other 3 strategies I have seen in practice. The question is, of course, what is going to work for you? And the only answer there is, it really depends. That depends on your context. It depends on the outcome of the conversations that you have with your colleagues. What is that mission, vision, and strategy? What does that mean for our data strategy? What does that mean for our data management strategy? And with which route are we going to take steps to get that value out of our data assets? And that brings me to the conclusion. I firmly and very deeply, over here in my gut, feel that in an increasingly digital world, you have to put the people first. All this digital stuff is really important. It's making your life a lot easier. But still, it's about you and it's about me. And the corollary is that whatever you do, if we want to start working with data, and I hope you do, then make sure you involve enough of people in your journey, and that you involve the right people in your journey. And if you discover who those are, but we're not equipped yet to do that, talk with them. Share your knowledge. Go to a course. Read a book. Try something. And learn together about how to get the most out of your data assets. This concludes our webinar. I hope you found it useful and that you will be able to use the results in practice. And imagine you still have some questions, so feel free to reach out to either myself or my colleagues here at Antwerp Management School. Also, please make sure you check out our digital transformation program. I hope to see you again.